Cancel every bouquet, or I will close this shop before the next woman reads her card. The command thundered across the flower shop so loudly that every conversation died at once. Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in America, stepped through the doorway with the calm certainty of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. His security team moved toward the employees, but 33-year-old florist Rosie Bennett planted herself firmly in front of them before anyone could take another step. Lorenzo snatched the delivery manifest from the counter. "I want the names of every recipient." Rosie took it back just as quickly. "You're already too late." She met his cold stare without flinching. 3 wives have left home. 7 girlfriends have blocked your men. 2 charity directors resigned this morning. 1 aunt changed her will. And Isabella Moretti is driving here right now wearing a wedding ring she intends to throw at someone. Governors answered Lorenzo's calls. Billionaires feared disappointing him. Yet the woman standing before him refused to treat relationships like contracts that could simply be withdrawn. The shop door opened again. Isabella walked inside, removed her wedding ring, threw it toward Marco Moretti, and said quietly, "The bouquet was the mistake. The reason I believed it wasn't." Silence swallowed the room. How had 99 bouquets exposed the emotional collapse of America's most powerful mafia family? Lorenzo turned toward his attorney without taking his eyes off Rosie. "Victor." Victor Hale adjusted his glasses. "Yes? I want every delivery invalidated." Victor hesitated only a second. "Legally impossible." Lorenzo frowned. "Nothing is impossible. The flowers have already been delivered." Victor folded his hands. "You can dispute contracts. You can reverse financial transfers. You cannot legally erase 99 emotional catastrophes that have already happened." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Then we'll send correction cards immediately." Rosie shook her head. "No." His eyes narrowed. "You're refusing?" "Yes." "You work for my family." "No," Rosie answered evenly. "My shop completed a paid order. We don't work for your family." Lorenzo took 1 slow step closer. "Another card explains the mistake." "No," Rosie repeated. "Another impersonal message makes everything worse." Before Lorenzo could answer, Marco hurried toward Isabella. "You know I'd never leave you." She laughed once. "That isn't comforting." Marco blinked. "What?" "You've behaved for years as though I'd never leave you either." He reached for her hand. "Bella." She stepped away. "I don't even remember the last gift you chose yourself." Marco looked helplessly toward Lorenzo. Lorenzo spoke immediately. "Marco, stay here. We have a crisis to manage." Rosie turned sharply. "No." Every head in the room turned toward her. "Saving your marriage comes before saving your dinner schedule." Lorenzo answered without emotion. "The appreciation dinner involves governors, donors, and major political relationships." Rosie gave him a disappointed smile. And that sentence explains exactly why every woman believed those cards. For the first time in years, Lorenzo Moretti found himself with no immediate reply. Instead, he looked around the flower shop. Small, independent, organized, successful. An obvious solution appeared. "I'll buy it." Rosie blinked once. "No." Victor hadn't even opened his folder. Lorenzo looked at her. "You don't know my offer. I don't need to." Victor quietly lowered the purchase documents. Rosie folded her arms. "Clients like you always reach for ownership when cooperation becomes uncomfortable." A faint smile appeared on Victor's face. Lorenzo noticed. "You find this amusing?" "I find it accurate." Rosie stepped behind the counter and spoke calmly enough for everyone to hear. "If you want those relationships repaired, the rules are simple." She counted them one by one. Every man apologizes in person. No assistance. No gifts before the conversation. Every woman has the right to reject the apology. You'll accompany me while we supervise the reconciliations. My shop will not arrange another bouquet for your family until every recipient decides what she actually wants. Lorenzo stared at her. You expect my entire family to accept public humiliation. Before Rosie answered, Isabella did. Humiliation can be educational. Nobody argued with her. Rosie looked toward Marco. You're first. Marco swallowed. He faced his wife. I am sorry the incorrect message upset you. Stop. Rosie lifted one hand. That isn't an apology. Marco frowned. What do you mean? What did you do wrong besides sending the wrong card? Marco opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Isabella answered for him. You forgot our anniversary. She held up one finger. You've forgotten it 3 years in a row. A second finger. Your assistant chooses every gift. A third. I organize every family dinner. Another. At public events you thank investors, employees, cousins, even drivers. She looked directly into his eyes. You never thank me. Marco looked genuinely confused. I work this hard to provide for us. Isabella smiled sadly. I didn't marry your payroll. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Lorenzo instinctively stepped forward. Marco has responsibilities. Don't. Rosie interrupted him without raising her voice. You're not speaking. The most feared mafia boss in America actually stopped. He remained completely silent, while his cousin's wife explained emotional neglect to the entire Moretti organization. Rosie reached beneath the counter and handed Lorenzo a small notebook with a cheap blue cover. What's this? A list. For what? For writing down what each woman actually asks for. Lorenzo examined it. One of my assistants can handle that. Rosie smiled. That question is exactly why you're holding the notebook yourself. He sighed, uncapped the pen, and reluctantly wrote the first sentence. His handwriting was nearly impossible to read. Victor glanced over his shoulder. You may want to print instead. Tony Russo stared at the luxury travel brochure in his hands as though it were a peace treaty. Rosie gently pulled it away before he could slide it across the cafe table. No, Tony frowned. She likes Italy. Rosie folded the brochure. That isn't the point. Across from him, Mia Parker crossed her arms. Try again. Tony inhaled deeply. I booked a private villa. Rosie sighed. You're negotiating. I thought women appreciated vacations. Mia looked at him for several silent seconds. Tony. Yes? What birthday did I celebrate last month? Tony answered almost immediately. The 15th. She shook her head. No. The 18th? No. Tony looked toward Lorenzo. Lorenzo remained expressionless. Answer honestly. Tony lowered his eyes. I don't know. Mia nodded sadly. I wasn't angry because you forgot once. Her voice stayed remarkably calm. I'm tired of being loved through employees. Silence settled over the table. Tony rubbed the back of his neck. I asked my assistant to remember birthdays. I know. I thought I was being responsible. You were outsourcing caring. Tony looked genuinely defeated. I didn't know there was a difference. Rosie leaned forward. There is. You hired someone to remember what should have mattered to you. Tony opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in years, he simply whispered, I'm sorry. No explanation, no excuses, no gifts. Mia smiled faintly. That's better. The reconciliations continued throughout the week. Different couples, different stories. Almost identical mistakes. One Moretti executive spent 15 minutes explaining how stressful his work had become. Rosie interrupted. She didn't ask why you ignored her. She asked whether you understood that you did. Another husband arrived carrying a diamond necklace. Rosie confiscated the velvet box before his wife even noticed it. Not yet. But it's worth. I don't care if it's worth $10 or 10 million. The man blinked. You apologize first. Another capo produced a printed presentation titled, Reasons I Have Always Been a Devoted Husband. Lorenzo quietly closed the binder. No charts. The capo looked horrified. I prepared graphs. No graphs. Between appointments, Lorenzo filled page after page inside the small notebook Rosie had given him. Every conversation seemed to reveal the same pattern. Women weren't asking for larger gifts. They wanted conversations, presence, attention, memory, respect. The realization made him increasingly uncomfortable. Because nearly every complaint also described him. His assistants managed family invitations. They selected birthday gifts. They arranged hospital flowers. They wrote thank you letters. They drafted apologies. Efficiency had always seemed like leadership. Now it looked suspiciously like distance. During a short break, Rosie glanced toward him. When was the last time you personally chose a gift? Lorenzo answered immediately. My staff prepares excellent recommendations. That wasn't my question. He thought for a moment. I honestly don't remember. Why? Selection isn't an efficient use of time. Rosie smiled. So is romance. He raised an eyebrow. That may be why your entire family is failing at it. Victor, sitting nearby with a coffee, nearly laughed aloud. The week's strangest moment arrived that afternoon. One enormous capo stood alone in an empty conference room, facing a chair. Rosie quietly opened the door. What are you doing? Practicing. For whom? My wife. Why the chair? She scares me. Rosie nodded thoughtfully. Continue. The capo cleared his throat. I acknowledge your emotional concerns. Rosie immediately stopped him. She isn't the human resources department. He tried again. I regret the communication breakdown. No. My behavior hurt you. Better. I was selfish. Keep going. He swallowed. I don't know how. Rosie smiled encouragingly. That's the first honest sentence you've said. Lorenzo watched from the doorway. No threats. No authority. No intimidation. Yet somehow Rosie controlled rooms filled with dangerous men simply by refusing to let them escape accountability. People paused. People listened. People cried. Sometimes people left. Rosie never chased them. She simply respected their boundaries. Lorenzo found himself studying her far more carefully than he intended. His phone rang. Rosie answered hers almost simultaneously. Hi, Elliot. Her entire expression brightened. Lorenzo listened despite himself. Yes. Tell Mrs. Dawson I'll remake the arrangement personally. She laughed. No, you're impossible. Another laugh. I'll be back in 20 minutes. She ended the call. Lorenzo looked at her. You laugh with him often. Yes. He speaks very casually. He's my shop manager. He seems comfortable around you. He is. Lorenzo remained silent. Rosie smiled knowingly. You do remember Elliot is married. I remember seeing a ring. She laughed. You sounded uncertain. The ring was unnecessarily subtle. Rosie shook her head. I sell flowers, Lorenzo. Yes? I don't provide private investigations for jealous billionaires. Victor pretended to cough in order to hide another smile. That evening, after the final reconciliation ended, Lorenzo walked beside Rosie toward her car. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, he said, You will dine with me after the final apology. Rosie stopped walking. She removed a blank order card from her bag, carefully copied his exact sentence, then stamped the card with a large red pen. Rejected. She handed it back. He looked confused. What does this mean? She pointed to the sentence. It sounds less like an invitation. She smiled mischievously. And more like a court summons. For perhaps the first time in years, Lorenzo Moretti looked completely uncertain. How should I have said it? Rosie folded her arms. Try again. He considered his words much longer this time. Finally, he spoke quietly. Rosie. Yes? Would you like to have dinner with me after we've finished helping these families? She studied his face. Better. Much better. I'll think about it. When will you decide? When you complete one emotional task. She smiled. Without using an assistant. Lorenzo looked down at the notebook still resting in his hand. For the first time in decades, he realized he had absolutely no idea how difficult that assignment would become. Lorenzo sat alone in his office, long after the day's reconciliations had ended. The small blue notebook Rosie had given him lay open beside his desk. Every page contained the same kinds of requests. Listen before fixing. Remember important dates yourself. Stop asking assistants to speak for you. Ask what she needs instead of deciding for her. The words looked absurdly simple, yet they described problems that had shaken the entire Moretti organization. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. The junior administrative assistant entered with trembling hands. I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti. Lorenzo looked up. She placed a resignation letter on his desk. I selected the wrong message template. He glanced at the envelope only briefly. I accept. She lowered her head. I understand. Before she could leave, Rosie, who had arrived to discuss the next day's appointments, stepped into the doorway. One question. The assistant stopped. Rosie looked directly at Lorenzo. When she chose that template, did she have permission to question your rushed instructions? Lorenzo answered without hesitation. No. Was she encouraged to slow the process if something looked unusual? No. Would your office have praised her for delaying an order worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? Silence. Rosie folded her arms. Then you're punishing her for following the exact culture you created. The sentence landed harder than any accusation she had made all week. Lorenzo slowly looked back at the resignation letter, then quietly tore it in half. The assistant stared in disbelief. Sit down. She obeyed immediately. Lorenzo rested both hands on the desk. If you could redesign this process, what would prevent the mistake from happening again? The young woman hesitated. You really want my opinion? Yes? She took a careful breath. Every personal message should require direct approval. Lorenzo nodded. What else? No impossible deadlines. He continued writing. If a message sounds emotionally unusual, employees should be allowed to ask questions. Another note. And. She swallowed nervously. People shouldn't be afraid of disappointing you. The room became completely still. Lorenzo slowly closed the notebook. Effective immediately. Those procedures are approved. He did not announce them as his own ideas. He simply looked at Victor. Implement them. Victor smiled. I already started drafting the policy. Rosie watched quietly. For the first time, she saw Lorenzo change something without needing credit. Later that afternoon, Lorenzo followed Rosie back to Petal and Promise. The familiar scent of fresh flowers greeted them. Rosie handed him an apron. He looked at it suspiciously. I wear tailored Italian suits. You also volunteered. I don't remember volunteering. You asked whether you could help. That counts. Reluctantly, Lorenzo put on the apron. Elliot looked up from a work table. This should be entertaining. Rosie nodded. Oh, it will. His first assignment appeared simple. Trim the stems. Within minutes, half of them were uneven. Rosie inspected the bundle. Did you negotiate with the scissors? They refused cooperation. The flowers? The scissors. She tried not to laugh. Next came arranging colors. He grouped every flower by size. It looks organized. It looks like a military parade. I dislike visual disorder. Nature disagrees. Then came ribbons. After several attempts, every bow resembled an expensive knot. Rosie gently untied the latest disaster. You're holding the bouquet like you're negotiating a merger. It lacks structural discipline. It's flowers, Lorenzo. They would benefit from better leadership. Elliot quietly walked away, before laughing too loudly. As the afternoon slowed, Rosie prepared a simple arrangement beside him. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Lorenzo asked, "Why are you so opposed to expensive gestures?" She continued trimming white roses. "My father apologized with gifts. He waited. He missed birthdays. Another stem. Broke promises. Another. Disappeared emotionally for weeks." She carefully placed another flower into the arrangement. Then he'd arrive with something beautiful. Lorenzo remained silent. "My mother accepted them." Rosie smiled sadly. Until one day, she didn't. She looked at him. She threw away the bouquet and left. The shop fell quiet. "My father never understood why," Lorenzo asked softly. "So every gift reminds you of that?" Rosie shook her head. "No. A gift means something. When behavior comes with it." She met his eyes. "Without change, it's just decoration, covering the same wound." The words lingered between them. After a long pause, Lorenzo spoke. "My mother used to complain." Rosie listened. She said, "Moretti men provided protection, but rarely provided presence. And I dismissed it." He looked down at the flowers in his hands. "I believed every practical need had already been met." Rosie asked only one question. Was she happy? Lorenzo opened his mouth. Nothing came. He searched years of memories. Family dinners, jewelry, security, expensive vacations, political banquets. Yet, he could remember his mother's emerald necklace far more clearly than her laughter. He stopped. "I don't know." Rosie didn't comfort him. She didn't pity him. She simply said, "It isn't too late." He looked at her. "The people who are still alive can still tell you how they want to be loved." As sunset filtered through the shop windows, Lorenzo quietly asked, "What makes you feel valued?" Rosie smiled. "Someone listening." She arranged another ribbon. "My work being respected." Another flower. "Receiving help only after I'm asked." She looked directly at him. "And being wanted." Without being managed, Lorenzo committed every word to memory. Not in the notebook, somewhere much deeper. That evening, before leaving, Lorenzo remained behind for several minutes. He found a blank note card, picked up a pen, ignored the beautifully printed cards prepared by his office. He wrote slowly. The handwriting remained terrible, the sentences awkward. When Rosie returned from locking the front door, he handed her the folded card. She opened it. It read, "You prevented me from solving the wrong problem 12 times today. I found this irritating and useful. Thank you." She laughed. Not politely, genuinely. She looked back at him. "So," Lorenzo tried to remain composed. "About dinner?" Rosie folded the note carefully instead of throwing it away. "I believe," she smiled warmly, "that's the first thing you've written entirely by yourself." A brief pause. "Yes." Lorenzo blinked. "Yes, I'll have dinner with you." For the first time all week, America's most feared mafia boss smiled without winning anything. Several reconciliations had begun to heal. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. Marco and Isabella no longer argued through assistance. Instead, they argued face to face. Oddly enough, that counted as progress. Another couple scheduled marriage counseling. One woman requested separate financial accounts before moving back home. Another insisted that every Sunday belong exclusively to family. No phones, no meetings, no bodyguards unless absolutely necessary. Several Moretti men found these conditions surprisingly difficult. Lorenzo understood why. None of them involved money. They demanded attention instead. The annual Moretti Appreciation Dinner was only 2 days away. For decades, it had been the family's most prestigious social event. Governors attended. Business leaders donated millions. Charitable foundations celebrated new partnerships. This year, every invitation carried invisible tension. Lorenzo stood inside the ballroom, reviewing preparations. Perfect lighting, perfect music, perfect seating, perfect timing. His communications director approached confidently. "The tribute video is finished." Lorenzo nodded. "Excellent." Rosie arrived moments later, carrying several modest floral centerpieces. She looked around. "Everything looks expensive. It should. It also looks rehearsed." Lorenzo glanced toward her. "It is." She sighed quietly. "That's exactly what worries me." The communications team dimmed the lights. The tribute video began. Elegant music filled the ballroom. Large screens displayed photographs of Moretti men signing business deals, opening charities, building hospitals, supporting communities. The narration praised their generosity, their leadership, their vision, their sacrifice. Rosie watched for nearly 2 minutes, then reached for the remote. Click. The screen went black. Every employee froze. Lorenzo slowly turned. "What are you doing?" She placed the remote on the table. "Preventing another disaster. The presentation honors our families." "No." She looked directly at him. "It honors the men." He frowned. "It thanks everyone." "It barely mentions the women." The communications director nervously shuffled his notes. Rosie continued. "The wives who planned the dinners. The girlfriends who remembered every birthday. The mothers who held the family together. The sisters who repaired arguments. The women who quietly protected your reputation." She looked around the silent ballroom. "They're invisible." Lorenzo answered carefully. "The intention was appreciation. The result says otherwise." His patience began slipping. "We've worked for weeks repairing relationships." "Yes. And now you're rejecting our efforts again." "I'm rejecting the performance." He stepped closer. "You think everything I do is control." Rosie remained calm. "No. I recognize effort." She softened slightly. "But effort isn't the same thing as understanding." He looked genuinely frustrated. "I changed policies." "You did." "I listened." "You did." "I apologized." "You did." "Then why does nothing seem enough?" Rosie held his gaze. "Because healing isn't a project with a completion date." Silence. Finally, Lorenzo asked the question that had quietly followed him for days. "If you distrust me so much, why did you accept dinner with me?" Rosie answered without hesitation. "Because I became interested in the man who was learning to listen." She took one slow breath. "But I'm not interested in becoming another woman responsible for teaching him forever." The words struck deeper than any public criticism. For the first time, Lorenzo felt personally rejected. Not as a mafia boss. Not as a billionaire. As a man. Rosie quietly left the ballroom. No dramatic exit. No accusation. Simply disappointment. Lorenzo watched the doorway long after she disappeared. The communications director approached carefully. "Should we restore the original presentation?" Lorenzo looked at the dark screen. Then, almost automatically, said, "Yes." Within minutes, word spread among the invited women. The original tribute video would remain. Several guests quietly collected their coats. "If that's the program, we're leaving." One by one, they began walking toward the exits. Marco noticed first. Then Tony. Then Isabella simply folded her napkin and stood. The room's carefully constructed perfection began collapsing again. Victor stepped beside Lorenzo. You have about 30 seconds. For what? To decide which matters more. Victor looked toward the departing guests. The evening, or your authority? Lorenzo remained completely still. Years of instinct urged him toward control. Protect the image. Protect the reputation. Protect the event. Then another memory surfaced. A bouquet may begin a conversation. It should never replace one. Rosie's voice echoed in his mind. Without another word, he walked onto the stage. Every conversation stopped. The communications team waited for instructions. Lorenzo looked at the technician. Delete the video. The technician blinked. Sir? You heard me. The giant screens went dark. Forever. Lorenzo faced the guests. He had delivered speeches worth billions of dollars, negotiated impossible agreements, addressed presidents. Tonight, he had no prepared remarks. He folded the printed speech, then tore it in half. I asked my staff to prepare a tribute. He paused. That was another mistake. The room remained perfectly silent. If employees write our gratitude, then we've outsourced appreciation, the same way we've outsourced apologies. He looked toward every Moretti man seated in the ballroom. No speeches written by assistants. No prepared statements. No scripts. If you have something real to say, stand up. If not, remain seated. He stepped away from the microphone. Nothing happened. 5 uncomfortable seconds. 10. Then Marco slowly stood. He faced Isabella. I still don't know how to do this well. A nervous laugh escaped him, but I know I stopped trying. She smiled softly. That's the most honest thing you've said all month. Applause didn't follow. Conversation did. Real conversation. Tony stood next. I remembered your birthday this week. Mia smiled. You remembered, because you wrote it yourself. I also checked 3 times. The room laughed warmly. Another capo rose. He unfolded a piece of paper, looked at it, then quietly put it back into his pocket. I don't know how to express appreciation. His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand. That's a better beginning than pretending. Throughout the ballroom, awkward honesty slowly replaced polished perfection. No orchestra, no dramatic lighting, no flawless production. Just people, finally speaking for themselves. Rosie heard about the change nearly an hour later. Elliot looked up from arranging centerpieces. Did you know? Know what? Lorenzo canceled the tribute video. She frowned. He what? He ignored his communications team. He made everyone speak personally. No grand speech, no performance. Rosie looked toward the window. He actually did it. Elliot nodded. And? He never asked where you were. Rosie looked surprised. He didn't? No. He just kept following your principles. She remained quiet for a long time. Something inside her shifted. Until now, every change Lorenzo had made seemed connected to earning her approval. Tonight, he had continued changing, even after believing he'd lost it. For the first time, Rosie wondered whether the transformation had finally become his own. The following morning, Rosie unlocked the front door of Petal and Promise just as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the sidewalk. She expected a delivery truck. Perhaps Elliot arriving early. Maybe another customer needing anniversary flowers. Instead, Lorenzo Moretti stood outside with empty hands. No roses, no orchids, no extravagant arrangement carried by assistants. Rosie raised an eyebrow. The most powerful mafia boss in America has finally run out of gestures? Lorenzo almost smiled. I am attempting something new. Oh? I wanted to arrive before deciding what you should receive. She studied him for a long moment before stepping aside. Well, that is definitely progress. Inside the shop, Lorenzo remained standing, instead of immediately taking control of the conversation. I owe you another apology. Rosie quietly continued preparing fresh flowers. For restoring the tribute video. Yes, and for expecting your patience to be unlimited. He stopped there. He didn't mention political pressure. He didn't mention donors. He didn't mention governors waiting in the ballroom. For the first time, he offered no explanation designed to soften responsibility. Rosie noticed. You're improving. I've had an excellent teacher. She smiled. I didn't volunteer for that position. I know. Another brief silence settled comfortably between them. Finally, Rosie nodded. I accept your apology. Lorenzo released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But, he laughed quietly. There is always a but. There should be. She met his eyes. Changing during a crisis is admirable. Continuing after the crisis ends matters more. He nodded once. I agree. Lorenzo reached into his jacket. Rosie instinctively sighed. If that's jewelry, it isn't. He unfolded several handwritten pages instead. Our family has adopted new rules. Rosie accepted the papers. Every sentence had been written personally. No assistant formatting. No corporate language. The first section read, no assistant may select intimate gifts. The second, no apology may be delivered through employees. The third, no appreciation event will be organized without consulting the women being honored. The fourth, financial support will never again be used to silence emotional requests. Rosie slowly looked up. You actually implemented them? Yes. There are more. He turned another page. My office procedures have changed. She continued reading. All personal messages require direct confirmation. Employees may question unusual instructions. Impossible deadlines must be challenged rather than obeyed. No employee will be punished for asking whether an order is correct. Rosie smiled. The junior assistant? She now leads personal event coordination. She earned it. She did. Several weeks passed. The media gradually lost interest in the scandal. Within the Moretti family, life remained imperfect. Marco still forgot small details, but now he planned one date every month himself. The first dinner reservation was made on the restaurant's closing day. The second accidentally included 6 business associates. The third featured spectacularly overcooked homemade pasta. Isabella laughed through every disaster. You're terrible at this. Marco grinned. I know. You're also trying. I finally realized those aren't the same thing. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. They're not. Tony prepared for Mia's birthday with military precision. He remembered the date. Then became so terrified of forgetting that he celebrated one day early. Mia laughed until she cried. You know it's tomorrow. I wasn't taking chances. She kissed his cheek. I appreciate the effort. At the Moretti headquarters, another change quietly reshaped the organization. Employees no longer whispered before questioning instructions. One assistant interrupted Lorenzo during a meeting. Sir. Yes? This deadline isn't realistic. Months earlier, silence would have followed. Instead, Lorenzo asked, what would be realistic? Victor watched the exchange and smiled to himself. The office had become calmer. Ironically, also more efficient. Meanwhile, Lorenzo visited Petal and Promise almost every week. Never with security unless necessary. Never announcing himself. One afternoon he appeared wearing another borrowed apron. Rosie pointed towards several buckets. White lilies. Yes? Trim them. He did. Carefully. Almost evenly. She inspected his work. You're improving. I've been practicing. The ribbons? He sighed dramatically. We don't discuss the ribbons. She laughed. I think we should. I respectfully disagree. Their relationship unfolded slowly. Proper dates. Long conversations. Handwritten notes. Ordinary afternoons. Lorenzo learned to ask before helping. Rosie learned that not every offer of support was an attempt at ownership. He still became mildly jealous whenever Elliot made Rosie laugh. She still reminded him, "Wedding ring. I know. Very married." I remain unconvinced the ring is sufficiently visible. Months later, 99 women gathered for a community fundraiser, sponsored jointly by Petal and Promise and the Moretti Foundation. Every arrangement carried a handwritten message. Rosie personally inspected each one. If a sentence sounded like an order, she rejected it. If it resembled a contract, rejected. If it attempted to purchase forgiveness, rejected. The Moretti men rewrote every message until the words finally sounded human. Only then did Rosie approve the flowers. Late that afternoon, Lorenzo approached the counter holding one final arrangement. Unlike his previous gifts, it was surprisingly simple. Seasonal flowers, soft colors, nothing extravagant. Rosie looked immediately at the attached card. His handwriting remained terrible. She smiled before reading. "You did not make my family unstable. You revealed that stability, built upon women remaining silent, was never stability." She closed the card slowly. "This one passes inspection." Lorenzo looked almost relieved. "May I deliver it personally?" "You may." He handed her the bouquet. She examined the flowers thoughtfully. "Interesting choice. You like them?" "I do." "Excellent. You realize these traditionally symbolize stubbornness." Lorenzo considered that. "That feels accurate." She laughed. "It certainly does." He looked at her quietly. "I need to say one more thing." She waited. "I don't want you because you repaired my family." He stepped a little closer. "I want you because you refuse to decorate the truth when it becomes inconvenient." The flower shop became perfectly still. "I don't know exactly what will become." He smiled softly. "But I'd like to keep building it. With you." Rosie looked at him for several silent seconds. "Only if you understand something." "I do." "You're not." She folded her arms. "I'm not responsible for keeping every Moretti relationship alive." "No." He shook his head. "I only hope you'll remain responsible for rejecting my worst flower choices." She laughed, then kissed him. Not because the bouquet was beautiful, not because he was powerful, but because he had finally learned that listening required more courage than commanding. 8 months later, Petal and Promise remained entirely Rosie Bennett's. Lorenzo never purchased the shop, the building, her suppliers, her schedule, or exclusive delivery rights. Instead, he became an ordinary customer. Every personal order had to be handwritten. Rosie still rejected messages that sounded like commands, contracts, threats, or acquisition proposals. Marco continued planning monthly dates without assistance. Most remained charming disasters. Tony still double-checked Mia's birthday weeks in advance. The junior assistant who once feared dismissal now directed every personal event protocol across the Moretti organization. Lorenzo remained one of America's most feared mafia bosses. He had not become weaker. He had simply learned that efficiency is not intimacy. Providing is not participating. Gifts cannot speak forever. Forgiveness cannot be purchased. And silence does not mean happiness. During a televised interview, a reporter finally asked, "Mr. Moretti, how did one florist manage to disrupt your entire empire?" Lorenzo smiled. She didn't disrupt it. She translated what 99 women had been trying to say for years, while the men around them kept sending flowers instead of listening. On Rosie's birthday, Lorenzo submitted another flower order. She read the attached card. "You will allow me to take you to dinner at 8. She stamped it immediately. Rejected. Lorenzo sighed. "I thought it sounded confident. It sounded like a board meeting." He took another card. Thought much longer, then wrote again. Would you like to have dinner with me at 8? Rosie nodded approvingly. The wording is perfect. She checked her delivery schedule. I can't do 8. Lorenzo looked up. What time works for you? 9:30. Months earlier, he would have reorganized her calendar. Now he simply smiled. 9:30 works perfectly. Rosie kissed his cheek, then handed him a heavy delivery box. He blinked. Why am I carrying this? She locked the shop door beside him. Because romance. She smiled mischievously. Does not cancel labor. Together they walked toward the waiting delivery van, one carrying flowers, the other carrying the weight, and for the first time, both carrying it willingly.